Anyways, why is Cologne so big in the Pershing's history? In fact, why is it even in this brief in the first place, even though it's all service in World War II for a little bit, and then most of its service life was actually in Korea, to where it served the entirety of the war until the Army replaced it, as you know, with the M26 patent, and the Pershing still saw service with the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Marine Corps, the Marine Corps. Well, Cologne is one of the few instances that involves a Pershing that everything, and I mean everything, went right for the Ordnance Department. It just a story fell into their lap, promoting the narrative that the M4 was completely outclassed, incompetent, and could not perform on the levels that were needed, but the Pershing could. So what's the story? The average story you'll hear about the M26 Pershing, the Cologne tank duel, well, the M26 Pershing, of course, but the Cologne tank duel has been done over and over again. In fact, we have done a video on it if you want to go watch a video. It's actually more informative than you would think. In fact, we're trying to do more of those where we recreate history at Machinima in War Thunder, but due to time constraints and stuff, that's a slow process, as you could tell, as you can imagine. And Helene was not any help to that, by the way. So the story is that the M4s, it was 1 to 3 M4s were traveling down the road, and then the Panther, about 800 yards away, takes a shot at them and penetrates the front of a jumbo. It was confirmed to be a jumbo in the footage. It fires 2 more shots into the jumbo, and the jumbo is disabled. It's done. The jumbo's done. And then the Pershing is called, or hears the engagement, and then responds pretty quickly, shows up. The Panther, in this meantime, moves from the underpass, the overpass it was under, the train station it was taking shelter in, or near, and moves forward to the intersection of several streets where at the base of the Cologne Cathedral. It's basically in the square of the Cologne Cathedral, which, if you don't know, Cologne Cathedral is a massive, massive cathedral. It's very impressive. I'm a Protestant myself, but when it comes to seeing Catholic architecture, I'm not going to lie, it goes hard. Anyways, if you play War Thunder, you know what I'm talking about. The Advance on the Rhine map has the Cologne Cathedral, but unfortunately, the spot where the Cologne tank duel happened was farther, say, if I'm thinking right, farther north of where the actual map of Cologne is. So it's quite unfortunate. But anyways, so the Cologne Cathedral, at the base of it sits the Panther, and it's looking down the street it engaged the jumbos at. The Pershing shows up, and the infantry show the Pershing tank commander, the sergeant in charge, what the Panther's doing, where it is. So the Pershing decides to, we're going to go down here and flank it, obviously. Don't pop out where the Panther's looking. Well, in this time, the Panther goes, I think I'm going to get flanked, and looks to his right. So now the Panther is looking down the street where the Pershing's about to be, and the Pershing's moving down the street. While moving down the street, the Pershing traverses its turret to the right, and then is ready to meet the Panther. So the moment the Pershing moves into sightline of the Panther, it'll put a shot into the Panther, killing it, obviously. The Pershing pulls into the street, and the Panther has full view of the Pershing for a couple seconds to realize that is a friendly Panther. The Pershing then responds in kind with a shot to the engine bay, a second shot to the crew compartment, and then a third shot to the crew compartment again. And about, I think it was 3 tankers escaped from the Panther, and two live. One of them died in a field hospital later. That was the commander. And that's the story of the Cologne Cathedral, or the Cologne tank duel. And the reason why it's so promoted by the Ordnance Department is because it's a perfect story, right? The Shermans were incompetent. They engaged the Panther, could not defeat the Panther, and then the Pershing shows up and could defeat the Panther, even though I'm going to get into that in a second. But is it really that impressive? Not really, but it's an interesting story for sure, and there's a couple oddities in it that is very peculiar. In fact, if you know actual armor penetration statistics from this point in the war, 800 yards to be hit by a Panther, a Pac 40 on a jumbo, that should not have penetrated, not even close. Sure, you would have heard a loud ding. It's not comfortable for the crew to be in and hear that, but it would not have penetrated at all. This is because in 1944, Germany started circulating less than prime ammunition. It was diluted ammunition. The powder was diluted because they didn't have the raw resources to make prime powder. So any ammunition that's actually performing up to snuff, I will refer to as prime ammo, and diluted ammo for obviously what ammo. This started in 1944, about, I want to say, somewhere in August and September of 1944. But most of the still prime ammo that was being produced during this time was being sent to the Eastern Front to fight the Soviets. That's because, well, on the Western Front, sure, you had the Churchill, but you weren't fighting IS-1s, IS-2s, KV-85s, that sort of thing on the Western Front. You were just mostly fighting medium tanks and light tanks. So the prime ammo was diverted towards the Eastern Front. Well, this Panther got its hand got their hands this Panther crew got his hands on a very, very valuable stock of ammunition. It was a crate of, I want to say, about 5 or so hyper velocity APCR rounds. And this is important for 2 reasons. Because in 1943, when this ammunition was still prime, or mostly still prime ammunition, the armor-piercing shot for a Pac 40 could penetrate a jumbo at about 200 yards, which is actually almost point-blank range for for actually any vehicle. A Panther especially, because the gunner has not very good optics. But hyper-velocity APCR, which the Americans developed their own kind, it's called HVAP. It's the same thing. It's a very thin, it's a very thin needle that can either be sabotted. The British used sabot in the 1940s, but it was so bad it couldn't pass 500. If it went to 500 yards, the round was so inaccurate you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from inside the barn with British sabot. It was bad until the Canadians fixed that issue in I think it was like 1946, 1947 they did with the 17 pounder, which would then go on to serve in the Centurion. Actually, the Pac 40 APCR ammunition, which there wasn't a lot of because tungsten was very rare to find, could penetrate a jumbo at about 900 yards. And the thing is, APCR doesn't like angles because it's so thin that when it hits a plate of armor, when it hits plate armor, the vibration reverberates back into the round, which causes it to shatter and high chance of bouncing. So the 47-degree angle of the M4A3's armor was not sharp enough to cause a bounce. In fact, T-34s would also suffer the same fate when fighting APCR rounds. APCR and HVAP rounds could still penetrate T-34 armor, less reliably so, but which was proven in Korea. In Korea, M4s were incapable of penetrating T-34 armor. Not because they couldn't, it was because everyone was using HVAP, and the angles they were fighting the Soviets at, or the North Korean tanks, the T-34s, was so high that it would end up, most of the rounds would bounce because they're either on an elevation, so when you hit the vehicle, it just bounces right off. So, no. Anyways, going back on point, the APCR could still penetrate jumbo armor in 1943. But this stash of rounds that was from 1943, or this prime ammunition that had been produced and somehow managed to end up on the Western Front, was found by the Panther crew. They took it and then they used it against the jumbo, which at 800 yards explains how it's able to penetrate, but also explains a few other things. When the round came in, it penetrated at the jumbos right above the transmission where the driver sat. It went in, killed the driver, and then killed the loader. They're both dead. Then the second round follow-up came and hit the middle of the hull, but when the jumbo was hit, the tank veered to the right just a slight bit. So when the Panther fired its follow-up shot, it hit the armor, went behind him, and killed the gunner, but severely wounded the commander, the sergeant inside, by cutting off his foot, which we reference in the Cologne video. But the bow gunner is fine. That's not atypical because solid shot ammo does the same thing. But the way armor penetration and damage works is that APHE, the reason why they have a fuse inside is so when it penetrates something, if it explodes in fuel or in ammunition, creates a fire, cool. But also, if it penetrates, what makes armor-piercing ammunition so deadly is that spall. When it hits something, the round itself will break apart, and the armor itself would also whatever is pushed in will also spall, but it's mostly the round will start spalling and spreading out. Well, APHE, something with an explosive fuse inside, will detonate, causing the cone to spread faster. But solid shot, on the other hand, will penetrate and will kind of branch out into a cone. But there's still a lot of material to work with, depending on the per diameter. So if you're dealing with a 76 millimeter, you still have 76 millimeters of AP ammunition to work with after it penetrates. But APCR, on the other hand, is very to a fine point. So the spalling cone is still there, but it's very small. That explains why the commander wasn't killed, but the gunner was. And the commander was only severely wounded because American tank commanders sat right behind their gunners in the M4. Well, actually, most tanks, even nowadays. So there's that. So the jumbo was taken out, and then the other M4s reversed out of the way and into cover. Now, as I mentioned in the story, the Panther, the Pershing, you'll hear me say that a lot. I'll say Panther and I mean Pershing, but and I'll correct myself, but I apologize ahead of time. But the Pershing was off somewhere else in combat, and then it heard the engagement and decided to go over and see what was up. But that's actually not what happened. The Shermans then pull back, and they're telling their company commander, "Hey, we had an incident. We lost the jumbo. We need reinforcements. The Panther's moving up the street now, and they're trying to get coordinated. We need some tanks as reinforcement." And what just so happened to be close by, because since these vehicles, in fact, these Shermans were being sent forward to scout ahead for the shot. They wanted the shot of a Pershing moving down the street. I say this happened, but this is what I suspect, that they wanted a shot of the Pershing moving down the street looking at Cologne. So they want to make sure that area was clear for the Pershing to move through, because they have a bunch of cameramen, they have a bunch of non-combatants that are trying to take footage, propaganda footage, so they want to make sure the scenes are clear and they are ready for the men to film, because unlike the Germans, they don't shove a camera in their guy's hand and go into combat and get your footage. We don't do that mostly anymore. Plus the combat, but mostly because the footage is the camera equipment's incredibly expensive. But there's also that we care about our men, right? Sometimes. Anyways, unless it's the bridge for the what's it called, that one bridge on the Rhine, you know what I'm talking about. That one single bridge on the Rhine that America fought tooth and nail, killed thousands of his own soldiers that were bum rushing the bridge to take it, and then it ended up collapsing anyways, because what was the point? Anyway, Remagen, the bridge at Remagen, thousands of soldiers. Anyways, I won't say thousands, but it was a good bit. It was a couple hundred that were bum rushing the bridge trying to take it, and then the Germans ended up detonating the explosives, but they weren't powerful enough. But the bridge ended up collapsing anyway. So what was the point? Anyway, tangent aside, the Pershing was filming propaganda footage. In fact, if you look at a lot of the footage from Cologne, that's part of it. It's the propaganda footage. So they called up the Pershing and said, "Hey, we got a pretty good opportunity for you here." So the Pershing goes down to investigate and to help out. They show up. They see the Panther. And the story is true at this point, where they get the commander out. They show him where the Pershing is, or the Panther is, and the Pershing goes to flank them. So as they're going to flank them, same thing. The turret he traverses the turret to the right. But here's the thing: people make this out to be that it happened over the course of a couple minutes or so that the Pershing showed up. 30 minutes. It was more likely about an hour and a half, probably 2 hours before the Pershing even showed up. So the crews are still watching this Panther just move up the street, and to about 400 yards away from where the Americans currently were. So 400 about 400 to 500 yards away from where the Americans were. So it wasn't just the Pershing was just in the neighborhood. I mean, it kind of was, but it wasn't as if the Pershing was in the neighborhood and quickly just immediately went over there. No. They had to finish wrapping up shots and everything. Now we get to the part of the story that is infuriating to hear at all, because we know it's just not wrong, but it's so prolific. I had to put it in here. I had to rant about it. That is that the Panther sees the Pershing roll into the street and goes, "That's a Panther." and says that's a friendly panther, so it's not going to shoot at its own comrade. The olive drab green that is also covered in white starred Pershing. Yeah, don't think so. Anyways, the Pershing then responds in kind, and you know the rest. A shot goes into the engine bay, taking out the engine. The commander orders a bailout. The loader gets shot and killed, I believe. I think this is what happened. The loader gets shot and killed. Then another round goes in, and the commander is leaving his seat and trying to go around the gun. And as he's doing this, as he's around the back of the gun, the second shot comes in and completely wounds the, the gunner. The gunner is severely wounded, and the commander is too as they're trying to crawl out, but the commander is better off. And the commander gets out, the bow gunner slash radio operator and the driver get out okay, and then the fourth shot, and then as the gunner is crawling his way out of the burning vehicle, a fourth shot comes in and it either kills the gunner as he's trying to make his way out of the back of the turret. We know this because we see him crawling out of the turret before a shot impacts the vehicle, and he slumps back into the vehicle. Either he died of his wounds, either the shock of the hit caused him to fall back inside, losing his concentration. He died immediately when the fourth shot hit. Whichever one, he fell back into the tank and was never seen again. The commander would then later die in a field hospital, or more specifically, medics tending to him in a crater, and the other two would survive. I'm just going to go ahead and be honest with you and just be blatantly honest. I don't think that the Panther mistook the Pershing to be another Panther, and there's several reasons why. Well, I mean, I'm also of the belief that it just absolutely could not have happened given the circumstances. But the official, or I say the official, the accepted story is that the Pershing pulled into the street. The Panther got to go look at it, and then the Pershing fired. The Panther hesitated. That's why the Panther lost the engagement, was because it hesitated. I don't even think that happened. But before I go into that, why I believe that, I'm going to tell you why the Pershing was not mistaken for a Panther. For one, the Panther commander should know what a Panther is. I know it's 1945, but come on, you got to know the basics of your vehicle here. And furthermore, the silhouette of just at a glance, the Pershing looks less like a Panther than the M476 does. Hear me out. The M476 from the front, it's at a glance pretty close. I wouldn't say pretty close. Again, at a glance, it's like is that a Panther? Oh no, wait, that's an M4. It's if you can kind of see it, but the thing is, it's not at all. I don't think in this same scenario that the M476 would have been mistaken for a Panther, because there's so many outlying details. I don't see it. I don't think that the Panther would have mistaken any vehicle, American vehicle, for a Panther. And the reason I believe this idea that it wouldn't have happened because the Panther commander knows what his Panther looks like, obviously, is because in the lead up to Operation Watch on the Rhine, which would later become known as Battle of the Bulge, the SS wanted to do a little operation where they had a behind the lines unit made up of Germans who would impersonate Americans. So they wanted American vehicles, American uniforms, American speaking, or English, I say American accented German soldiers. And by the time this operation was to come to fruition, it wasn't going so well. The uniforms were one thing, because you capture plenty of people, you can just get their uniforms. It's not that hard. But the issue comes with the vehicles. Well, let alone that you have very small amounts of German soldiers who know how to speak English, that aren't, that actually are grunts and not just higher up officers, and let alone ones that can speak with an American accent. So, and then also the vehicles. I believe they had about an amalgamation of trucks and two M4 Shermans that were in a state of disrepair, and that's coming from the Germans. Where the U.S. say if your vehicle cannot be repaired within at the end of the day, by the end of the day, that vehicle is written from the record. We have lost that vehicle. But then the crew goes out there the next morning and replaces the transmission on that M4 that had its transmission shot out, and then they put a new one on it. They've gained back a vehicle, right? So they're quick to dismiss vehicles as combat ready vehicles. But the Germans say, hey, this vehicle is damaged to the point where it would cost as much to build a new one and be easier to build a new one, but we could fix it for the same amount of money. Yeah, that's completely fixable, dude. Never gonna get fixed. But anyways, that's just that aside. So it was not shaping up well. So in order to impersonate American vehicles, they took 10 panthers. They called these eventually the Erzat panthers, which I believe means false panthers, something like that. And what they did was they painted OD green, obviously. Then they welded what's effectively turret skirts into the side of their armor, which made them try to resemble M10 tank destroyers. And yeah, there you go. They removed the commander's cupola, of course, because the M10's open top. Yeah, didn't go well. American tankers found out that these were not American tanks very quickly because obviously, that's an M10, except you say you're an M10, but that has a German muzzle brake. It could be an Achilles, but there's no counterbalance, and the fact that it's there shouldn't be British here, and you have American markings on a British vehicle, no, and also your tracks are just ungodly wide for an M10. Your road wheels overlap, and your hull, instead of going out and then a diamond shape, or yeah, a wide diamond shape, it goes out and down. That's a Panther. Immediately, just off the bat, two were immediately just eliminated and found out, and the other 8 Ersatz Panthers just functioned as normal Panthers, but your commander's blind, so they weren't all that effective. The point I'm trying to make here is that tankers know their own tanks. That's the point. So I don't think that the Panther could have mistaken the Pershing to be another Panther. And to say the least, now I get into what actually happened. And the thing is, I know with confidence because I have the say I have, well, it's the account from the crew. What the crew say happened after they pulled up to the intersection, or they pulled up to the point where the American Shermans and the infantry were stationed. They looked around the corner, so okay, there's a Panther there. Then they go to flank the Panther. On the way there, the commander goes, all right. The sergeant says, all right, traverse right, and the gunner traverses to the right, and then he says, I'm giving you the discretion of when to fire. This is telling the gunner, hey, when you feel like it, fire. You don't have to wait for my order. Because usually the commander of the vehicle tells the gunner when to fire. It's one thing for the bow gunner to start letting loose rounds at a legitimate threat to the tank, but it's another thing if the gunner just lets loose rounds, unless it's a quick reflex or something like that. But just start sending rounds up. You typically want to wait for your commander to give you the order to fire as a gunner. But the gunner has now been given discretion of when to fire by the commander. So they're going down the building. They're going past the buildings parallel to where the Panther is, and then the driver is ordered to speed up. This immediately throws a red flag in the accepted story of where the Panther just pulled into the intersection and meandered until the Panther had enough time to hesitate, and then the Panther fired first, or Pershing fired first. But they're speeding up, and then eventually when they get close to the buildings, the way it's positioned is there's a reference. There's probably going to be a reference image here, but if not, the the driver is this way, the gunner's over here, so they're moving to the left. The point is, the driver and the gunner, as far as the length of the crew compartment goes, the driver and the gunner are on opposite ends of the crew compartments. The driver's all the way at the front, so he's the first one to see if he's pulling into the combat area. And as he does so, he sees the Panthers looking at them. So he immediately hits the gas to do an evasive action by just pulling forward. And the gunner is just thrown into the street. And then he sees the Panther, traverses, and fires. And the reason why he does, and also, even if the Panther was ready for the Pershing, which I don't think it was, and that's because this isn't War Thunder, right? The aggressor usually has a disadvantage in a game like War Thunder because they're there. But this is not War Thunder. This is not You've probably been waiting an hour for this engagement to happen. There's probably been an hour and a half since you've ever seen any enemy vehicles, and all you know is that there are a couple Shermans down the street down where you're looking, and they might try to flank you. So because in your infinite wisdom, you decide to park at an intersection. But that's just me. So you traverse your turret to the right to look down the street where they might come from, flank and spank. They might flank and spank. Anyways, also, even if the Panther was ready for the Pershing when it pulled out, and then the driver did an evasive action, if the Panther missed or just couldn't the Panther would have had a much harder time laying onto the target than the Pershing did. And here's why. For one, the gunner can barely see jack in a Panther because it's not so much the fact he's at magnification, which is one thing, but he's got this much to see out of. It's narrow. He has no field of view. The Pershing, on the other hand, has wide vision prisms. He has wide vision blocks, and like the Soviets, we actually use mirrors in ours and not highly polished steel. Anyways, he has a wide field of view, so he has a perfect view of the Panther. Furthermore, the Panther has an awful turret traverse. Well, obviously, but War Thunder says otherwise. You're right, War Thunder does, and in fact, that is the actual turret traverse of a Panther. When the engine's at max RPM, that's actually not a falsehood. Panthers, their turret traverse is directly tied to how fast or the the RPMs of the engine. So the higher the RPMs, the higher the turret will traverse. Genius, superior German engine, genius, superior German engineering. But that's just me. And the Pershing just decides to just have an electric motor where the gearbox is on the turret ring, so it's completely separate from the engine RPMs. Even then, the engine RPMs would have been high on the Pershing anyways because the gunner was bum rushing it into the street, which is another thing. I give the electric transmission on the Pershing a lot of crap, as it should get. It's just awfully unreliable. But the thing is, the transmission is very fast. That's the point. The transmission is incredibly quick. It's quick to accelerate, it's quick to move forward, and in reverse at the same speeds, because that's just how the electric transmission works. So it's really good in that aspect. The electric transmission is good in theory, it just in practice it had a lot of issues, among others. But that's the glaring one out of the Pershing. The point is, the Panther did not mistake the Pershing for a Panther. There's just no way. The Pershing just fired first, and we know this from the accounts of the crew. Now, why do I say that? Why do the whole point of me mentioning Village of College is to mention the whole political gain part at the end? Well, this is that exactly. If you understand, and if you have not, and I probably haven't emphasized it as much during this video, but the Ordnance Department really does not like the M4, pretty much because they look at it as an outdated design and the Pershing as the next gen model, which I'm going to be honest with you, the Pershing, for all the crap I give it, it is the next gen model of US vehicles. In fact, America's first MBT was the M26 Patton, which was pretty much made just to be a replacement, for both the M4 and the M26, because the M26 never really replaced the M4 as their universal tank, because the M4 was America's first universal tank, and the Pershing was meant to replace it, but it never could. In fact, the Army never got rid of it. In fact, the only time the Army did get rid of the Pershing was because they just brought on board a bunch of M46 Pattons, and all of a sudden the Marine Corps had spare parts, and that's the only reason why the M26 saw service in the Marine Corps for as long as it did. But then, once the Korean War ended, then they replaced their fleet of M4s and M26s with the M46 Patton. And the M46 Patton hull, which is a modified hull of the Pershing, would then go on to be warped through the design to the M47, M48, I think the M103 Heavy at one point as well, to eventually culminate in the M60 Patton, which would then be America's last NBT until the M1 Abrams would be their new next gen NBT, would come out in the 1980s. And what do I mean that Cologne is America's Village Bocage? Well, Village Bocage, in short, was a ambush where Vikal Wittmann went and engaged, did some ridiculous stuff down in Village Bocage, the British-held village recently taken, and then some shenanigans ensued. And of course, as Germany does, over exaggerates the details because propaganda, and then he leaves. Well, the over exaggerated report. If you want to get a very good story of how Village Bocage happened, even though I don't so much like him so much, Laserpig did a great video on the ambush at Village Bocage on Vikal Wittmann, so go watch that video. It's a decent, it's a really good take on Village Bocage and what actually happened there. And so but the point is, the over exaggerated report given to that Vikal Wittmann gave on the radio broadcast was mirrored exactly by the British officer who was in charge of writing the report of what happened at Village Bocage, because he was part of a political organization within the British military that was dedicated to slandering the current in-service vehicles that the British were using in favor of his own, or at least of his own organizations. So basically, the British version of the Ordnance Department. The Ordnance Department did the same thing here. They said, look at the Shermans. They tried to take on the Panther, even though they couldn't see him, and they failed. And yet the Pershing was able to do what the Shermans couldn't, ignoring the fact that what the Pershing did, the M4s have already been doing. So that is America's village Ricage. That the story is the only reason why the story is so big is because the Ordnance Department made it big in the first place just to make political gains. Why do you think the same person who wrote that awful book Death Traps, Belton Youngblood Cooper, is a former ordnance is an ordnance officer to the Third Army Division? Everything he says about these, and the thing is, in his book, Pershing good, good, Sherman bad, right? Because they're trying to, and it's they're trying to create the next gen American vehicle, which the Pershing was. It absolutely was. It was the technology on board was next gen American, even though it didn't have the stabilizer. Thank you, Army Ground Forces, for that. I will criticize you forever for that. I still like you better than Ordnance Department. They're dumb, but anyways, the point is the Pershing absolutely marked as an important step in American tank design that smaller hulls, electric transmissions, rear drive, everything. But it was just too much too soon, and literally it was I am limited by the technology of my time. The M4 was, and the thing is, the Ordnance Department was responsible for a very good vehicle. The M4 was top three at the least in the world. Was the if not the greatest medium tank, and in fact set the stone the idea for a universal tank, a tank that could rely on itself and its own forces instead of tank destroyer branches or anything like that. It could still just do the work itself and laid the groundwork for the idea of the universal tank. I will go more into that on the video on the M4, which I probably won't be doing next, but we'll see. I think I'm going to try to do a video on the Vickers 6-ton, but depending on my research department, we'll have to see. With that in mind, though, I'm calm. I am tired. Thank you for watching this video about me ranting about the M26, and please pray for the people who have been affected by Hurricane Helene. Not so much us, we're fine, but everyone else, and it hit them hard, and I feel very much for them. But anyways, with that out of the way, get back to work.